Hey everybody, Brendan here. Welcome back to a new video. Today we are going to be covering another game from Fischer's 60 Memorable Games. This time Fischer is playing with the white pieces against Hector Rosetto, and this one was quite interesting. It features a Zugzwang in a position where it doesn't feel like a Zugzwang should even be something you would worry about. So let's get into the game. We see e4 from Fischer, c5, knight f3, and e6, and already we got an exclam move, d4. The reason I say that is because, well, d3 was played last time that this position was reached. This was actually game one. If you check the playlist, which you can find on the homepage of my channel here, you can see that in game one, d3 was played and a King's Indian attack was played with some g3, bishop g2, etc. Instead, things were switched up quite a bit here, and d4 was played, which gives you completely different positions. One, you're going for a King's Indian attack, which is like a reverse King's Indian defense. You know, the name kind of says it all there. And this is going for an open Sicilian. So let's see how it goes. C takes d4, knight takes d4, a6, and now we have c4. Which is quite interesting here. The more popular moves that people are more used to seeing, bishop d3 is the most popular move in this position as of now, which is 2022. Knight c3 is also close behind that. c4 is comparatively not played as much. The first two moves had a collective about 27,000 games played in a live database, whereas c4 only had about 4,000. So it is played considerably less here. Of course, it is still a move, and after knight f6, this is what Fischer claims: knight f6, knight c3, and bishop e4. Fischer claims that this is actually an improvement from the game instead, as theoretically at the time this was considered about equal. It is interesting to note here as well that queen c7 is slightly more preferred. At least it's more played at the top level as of now. But bishop to b4, there's nothing wrong with the move at all. This is quite a good one. So queen c7 was played immediately. Now we see knight to c3, knight to f6, and now bishop to d3. Fischer claims this is a mistake, mainly because of concrete reasons, as we'll see. I don't think the move is that bad, but I do agree with Fischer that his analysis of a different move was stronger here, which is a3. And the idea of a3 is mainly prophylactic. The idea is to prevent bishop to b4, and because of this, the position will be a bit more cramped for black, as well that's the most natural square for it, and this would allow counterplay against e4 and also make d5 easier to play, which is kind of something you're really looking for in these Maroczy structures where you have a pawn on c4 and e4 as white. So bishop to d3 was played instead, and yeah, now bishop to b4 is something that is always in the air now. Knight c6 was played, bishop to e3 here to reinforce the knight and develop at the same time, and knight takes d4 was played. Fischer claims this is a mistake, and I think that is actually correct here. The problem here is it might feel natural to take on d4 and try to go for trades, but the thing is, although it's a cramped position and that feels like the right approach, black should be going for activity, and there's a way to do that which offers some good dynamic chances, and that's the move knight e5, where it's a little bit trickier. For example, a bad move here, which feels natural, is rook to c1, where after rook to c1, knight f to g4, surprisingly white is already worse, quite significantly, as it's really hard to defend this piece on e3. If you move it, because again, you don't really want to lose the dark squared bishop in these positions, especially after e6. These e6 Sicilians are notorious for having potential dark square weaknesses for black, and if you lose your dark square bishop as white, any of those chances are kind of not only gone out the window, but black has solved all of their problems and then some. Black can definitely be considered better in those lines, especially with the bishop pair and a Sicilian. So yeah, that's not really an approach that's possible here. Instead, knight takes d4 was played. Again, it's natural, but it's not the right call. Bishop takes d4. Bishop c5, going for more trades here, and bishop c2. Saying that, yeah, if you want to trade, that's totally fine, but you have to trade on my terms, because after bishop takes d4, queen takes d4, if we just look at the development, white is quite happy here. There's a really interesting technique that Yasser Seirawan would do, which is just count the material that's developed. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and of course both sides are about to castle, but white is somehow just up a move and has a very pleasant position where both d5 and b5 are not really the easiest things to play. So bishop to c2 here, d6 was played instead, as taking on d4 just kind of increases those problems for black. So the move d6 was played instead of initiating further trades here, and after d6 what we see is castles. There's actually another interesting option which I immediately disregarded because it doesn't really look like something that white would normally want to do, and that's bishop takes f6. So the reason why I discarded this is because after g takes f6, as someone that plays the Sicilian, the classical Sicilian, this feels like a structure we're actually quite happy with, mainly because, well, there's always potential of either casting short and then bringing the rook to g8. So yeah, let's just say castles here. Let's just throw random moves: queen d2, castles, queen d1. This is obviously not good, but we can see some sort of counterplay like this, and it's not really easy to target some of the weaknesses for black after this point. And surprisingly, this is actually pretty good for white, but they have to find a specific move. Bishop to a4 check, which looks a little strange, but the idea is very, very clear after you see what does black do. If black plays king e7, which normally would feel good here, after castles, h5, rook to c1, just normal developing moves, we slowly see that problems start to occur. Bishop d7 feels like it might have to be played just because we need to connect the rooks as black. Bishop takes, queen takes. Now, just a simple move, queen f3. It feels like nothing special has been done by white in the past few moves, but there's actually a slight nagging edge for white, and that's because the king is not really as happy as it may appear to be on e7. Because the queens are on the board, more specifically, there's always potential king safety problems in the future, and the imbalance of knight versus bishop just adds a little bit more to the position for attacking potential here. So yeah, this is something that I just wanted to point out. There's a slight edge for white here that I originally just didn't think existed, but it actually does. So going back to the game here, we see castles, bishop to d7, and knight to a4. So the move knight a4 was an attempt to force exchanges, which Fischer claimed that there would actually be a microscopic advantage, to quote specifically from the book, but there's actually a problem here. So bishop takes d4 was played, and that's correct. Queen takes d4, but rook d8 isn't as accurate. There's actually a really surprising move here, e5, This looks really stupid because you are making a huge weakness on d5, and you're never pretty much ever getting d5 in now, and d6 is also weak. So why would this ever be entertained? But there's actually a very, very important reason. So queen d1, you shouldn't really go pawn hunting here. In any scenario, because you're not developed yet, not castled. This just wouldn't work out. Plus, knight b6 also kind of is a problem here. So, gotta make sure we're not just allowing that. So yeah, after queen to d1, surprising move here, king e7. Surprisingly, the king is very well placed. There's not really a way to target the king at all. And the thing that's going to happen next is, well, the good thing is the king is now defending the weakness on d6, which is very nice. Now we can start developing our king side with a move like rook h to c8 here. And after that happens, we can eventually play king f8, but the king is quite happy on e7 for the moment because it's doing a great job defending d6. So a sample line here, rook c1, rook h c8, bishop to d3, as there could be concrete threats of bishop takes a4 and knight takes e4 here that we got to watch out for. So yeah, bishop d3, bishop takes a4, queen takes a4, and queen b6. This is just a computer line, of course, but despite the backwards pawn on d6, it's actually pretty difficult to find an active plan because of this light squared bishop. It's not really such a great piece, whereas, sure, we're never getting d5 as black, but b5 is possible. And also, it feels like black can make easier moves here. Rook c7, king f8, even some sort of like g6, king g7, like fianchetto the king here. That feels very, very safe, and we're able to get active quite easily, actually. And the computer thinks if anyone's going to be slightly better here and have a slight pull, it's actually black, which is quite surprising when you see this weakness on d6 here. So that is an interesting line. Rook d8 was played instead. This e5 stuff is quite hard to see, of course. Rook f to d1. Castles, and rook a to c1. So there's mentioned queen takes d6, queen takes d6, rook takes d6, bishop takes a4, rook takes d8. Fischer said that it's actually totally equal after rook takes d8, and then bishop takes a4, knight takes e4. But the truth is, there's actually a variation that was missed. After, if we just go back here, so queen takes d6, queen takes d6, rook takes, bishop takes, rook takes d8. We actually shouldn't really take back on d8 here. Bishop takes c2 is a much better attempt at an advantage, simply because it's a two pieces versus the rook situation, where after rook takes f8, king takes f8, f3 needs to be played to defend the pawn. Yeah, black is actually slightly better here, and a big part of it is because it's two pieces versus the rook. It's hard to make direct progress immediately here for black, but this is actually more ambitious and a more accurate way to play than the game, or than the variation that Fischer recommended. So instead, rook ac1 was played, which is definitely going to be a better try, as queen takes d6 isn't going for equality. It's actually going for probably a worse position as white. Queen to a5 was played, and this is an interesting move. Normally you'll see these types of moves in the Maroczy positions because it helps with some sort of d5, and it also helps with potential b5s as well. The problem is, for example, b5 immediately looks tempting, but after c takes, a takes, and knight c3, there's potential discoveries in the air, like knight to d5, knight takes b5, e5, of course, trying to hit h7. Just this file here, there could be pretty catastrophic results due to the rook and the queen being lined up. Fischer says after bishop c6, there's just like a lack of space here, which is quite fair to say as black. Normally it would feel good just or great just because we got b5 in, but there's a lot of potential problems along the c file, and even though there has been a little bit more activity for black just for the moment, doesn't really feel like it's actually going to work out quite that much. Moving on, rook ac1, queen a5, queen to b6 here. Just trying to initiate more trades. Queen takes b6, knight takes b6, and bishop to c6. We see f3 now. This is just a very important move, and you're going to see this a lot in Maroczy positions. If you ever play e4, or even the English, you might even see Maroczy. And the whole idea is, yeah, you're probably going to play f3. You might even play b3 just to keep all of your pawns extremely well defended. So now we should also talk about the potential plans. So one of the big plans for black here is to target d6 or to go for a pawn break. And what pawn breaks are there? So there's only really one in the position, maybe two if you count e5, but c5 is the bigger pawn break of the two moves. So knight to d7 was played, and knight to d5 was played as a response, which is really cool. And yeah, knight takes d7 isn't really an ambitious try, because after rook takes, rook d2, rook f8, rook dc1, this is a line, again, that is very, very straightforward. There's just no chances. I guess that's not really a fair statement, but doesn't really feel like there's much progress that can be made without creating a lot of concessions ourselves. So, of course, this wasn't something that Fischer did. So, knight to d5 was played instead. So, for example, e takes d5, they actually do not just straight up win a piece here. We can play e takes, for example, and after e takes, what we can do here is just take the bishop back. So that is a good thing for us. I guess it's important to also see c takes as well. C takes is quite interesting. Bishop to b5, a4, bishop to c4, b3, bishop to e2, rook to d2. And it appears like the bishop does get trapped as well. Though this is a little bit more long-winded and a little bit more scary to allow, just because there's a lot of mobility for the piece. Feels like it's much easier to mess that up. So e takes definitely feels like the safer option of the two. So bishop takes d5 was played instead. E takes d5. And we see the move e5 here. Fischer claims that knight e5 was safer, but surprisingly that's not true. So there's a really weird line the computer gives as to why white has an advantage, but it's very abstract and it's not immediately obvious until we finish the line. So bishop to e4, b6 is something that Fischer claims was better, and it was pointed out that f5 is not really a good move because we can actually take on e6 here, and e7 is a problem, so that's an issue there. But after b6, there's this funky move rook d4, which just solidifies everything, and it's hard for black to move and make any reasonable improvements to the position over the next few moves, as we'll see. So rook fe8, just because this is kind of like a normal active looking move. f4, knight d7, d takes e6. So there is actually a threat, and that's kind of why rook e8 is played. Just because after f4 and d takes e6, if f takes e6 was played here, maybe there's like rook e1. So this is just in preparation to play rook e6. But this is actually a problem because although it does defend the d6 pawn, the problem is bishop to d5 rook f6, and actually b4 is recommended, and black's just surprisingly paralyzed. There's not really any improvements that black can make that easily. Like, for example, a5 is a tempting move. We don't really want to take it. If we take, then now they get like knight c5 and everything, and some counterplay can be made. But after a5, we can just respond with a3. And even if they open up the a file, it doesn't matter. Actually, this helps white more than black, just because a8 is covered. There's not really a way to challenge the a file as a response, which is quite surprising. Yeah, so very abstract line, but a very cool one nonetheless, and it kind of highlights the domination that's possible from a seemingly normal position. So e5 was played instead, b4, going for a future c5. Now we see g6. So this was actually a really cool move. The important reason why it was played is because of a5, a3, a b4, rook a8 would be a mistake because of bishop to f5, surprisingly. The knight feels like it has to move, c5 comes in, which is white's big strategic idea, and black is in trouble. Of course, instead of that, g6 is also a possible move here as well, and then going for some sort of rook a8. But instead, g6 was played immediately, which means that a5 might still be in the cards. Bishop to a4 now, and b6 was played. So knight f6 is actually just much better for a choice practically, even though it looks like it's not that useful. And the reason why I say it's not that useful is because when you play g6, you also think of f5, but f5 isn't as important as stopping c5. So knight f6 makes c5 a little bit more, not difficult, because c5 is still going to be played no matter what, but this kind of improves the position that black can get as a result, because there's going to be pressure under d5 at the end. So bishop to b3 is a natural move here, going for c5 and overprotecting d5, because c5 might be tempting here, but of course this does not work, as takes, and rook takes d5. So of course bishop to b3, and now d5 is defended again. Rook to d3, a5, a3, takes, rook a8, and then now c5. And the idea here is rook a3. So all of a sudden we shift our rook and get activity along the third rank and get a tempo on the bishop. And the bishop doesn't really want to move anywhere. And if you defend it with rook d3, which feels like a natural move, but also not natural move, because everything kind of feels pinned, feels like there's always potential of taking on d5 now. Of course, taking on d5 looks like it's working, because if rook takes, then there's rook takes here, and if bishop takes, then there's rook takes here. But the surprising move, c takes d6 here, is a problem, because d7, rook c8, or d8 actually just wins the game, and black is horribly coordinated. So that is something we have to watch out for as black. Instead, after d takes c5, b takes c5, and rook d8, the pawns are kind of controlled for the moment, and it's just enough, surprisingly. Black definitely is the one defending, but black's not dead yet. So that's an interesting line to point out. Now we see b6 instead. Rook to d3, f5, and this is kind of what I mean. It's a very natural move to go for f5, because this looks like almost like a King's Indian structure. So f5 is normally what you go for, like knight f6 and e4, but it's just not as important as preventing c5. So rook a3, and knight to b8 was played. So there is a better potential move in the position. Fischer claims that it's dead lost, and maybe that is true for him. But at the same time, this a5 move, I think is practically still the better try. And one of the lines that's given is b takes, bishop c6, knight c5, and rook takes a5. The reason why I say that this is a better practical try is not because I'm good at chess, simply just because the engine states that this isn't as bad for black as it might appear. White does have a slight advantage here, and this might actually prove to be problematic and just completely losing. But just going off of the pure eval here, and also just looking at the position where at least we have a active or semi-active piece here with the knight on c5 and some sort of imbalance where it feels like we'll be kicking for a little bit longer than we are in the game variation. So rook to a3, knight to b8. So there's a problem here. If king to g7 or something, there's bishop takes d7 and rook takes a6. This is a huge threat. So that's something that has to be avoided. And that's why knight to b8 was played. After c5 breaking through, this is a huge problem for black because white got their plan. B takes, d takes, rook takes, and white is very, very active on the c file, on the a file, and the bishop is doing a lot more than that knight on b8. Here, the game almost feels over, and it is, by this point, actually just practically lost for black. King g7, rook to b3, rook to f7, d6, very, very nice move. The point is, we're trying to get that pawn up the board, and also tactically, this just works out, because if you take, then thank you for the knight. So knight d7 was played. Now we see rook c7, and then knight to f8, trying to remaneuver and play more of an active role in the game. But it's also not really that active, is it? So rook b7 was played, and I think this is a very, very clever move, because I think Fischer had seen what the idea was already. But rook takes c7, d takes c7, and rook c8. There's the surprising move bishop to b3. It doesn't feel like the move does that much, but the move does a lot. It is black to move, and it is very hard to find a good move. What's the problem? If the king moves forward, rook b8 wins the knight. I'll show that. King f6 or king h6, doesn't matter. Rook b8 wins the knight because you have to take on c7, and we take on f8. So that doesn't work. If we move the knight, bishop to e6. This just wins the game immediately. There's no discussion there. So the king can't really move because of rook b8. And the knight can't move because of bishop e6. The rook can't move because if the rook moved anywhere, rook b8 would win. For example, rook a8, rook b8, rook e8, rook b8. Both moves will win the game. So black's actually in Zugzwang here, and the game's going to be over in just a few moves. White just has to wait for black to just waste some time themselves, and then they're going to have to concede something, one of these moves, either rook move, king move, or a knight move, and the game's over. So a5 was played, a4, h6, and it's important to mention that knight d7 isn't the only bad move. If you play knight h7, bishop to e6 comes. So after h3, knight h7, bishop to e6 is still a problem. The pawn is still promoting. So g5 was played. Fischer played g4, just kind of finishing things off immediately, because after f takes and h takes, everything is frozen. The king can't move, the knight can't move, the rook can't move. The pawns don't want to move because you just give them up. h5 you take it, e4 you take it. Even still, like, something's going to have to move eventually, and rook b8 or bishop e6 is going to come. For example, h5 takes. What's your next move? Not clear at all. and that's a problem. So still lost. So that's why after h takes g4 here, Hector resigned, and that was actually a really interesting ending, with also a very interesting Maroxy bind situation here, where even though we could trade as black, we really shouldn't. And it has to do mainly with not only development, but the fact that the position didn't really call for it. We needed to go for activity instead of trading. And there was just concrete problems with going for the trade on d4 there. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed that game. I will see you guys next Friday with game number 6 or 7. I think it's 6 of Fischer's 60 memorable games. I hope you guys enjoyed, and have a good one.